The coronation robes weighed on me like a tomb. Threads of gold and emerald silk snaked across the fabric, not in celebration, but in mockery. They were meant to drape over the shoulders of a king. Tonight, they would hang on a monster. A knock on the oaken door startled me. "Majesty, are you ready?" It was Geoffrey, my advisor, my oldest friend. He was the only one left who used such formality with me. "Nearly," I muttered, the word a painful scrape against my dry throat. The hunger ravaged me, a fire blazing in the pit of my stomach. I'd kept it at bay for now, but barely. "Well, they won't wait forever. You've a kingdom to inherit, you know," Geoffrey said, though whether in jest or worry, I couldn't tell. A kingdom to inherit. The irony choked me. What sort of kingdom did I rule over now, other than the howling legion of my own hunger? "Come!" I forced out, pushing away the heavy curtain that covered the doorway. Beyond it, torchlight speared the dim corridor in fiery strokes. As I moved through it, shadows skittered from my skin. Even with my heightened senses, I couldn't see what they saw. But I knew. The scent of blood clung to me like a shroud. Geoffrey marched beside me, the soft clink of his ceremonial sword the only sound in our procession. He'd fought with my father at the Battle of Greywater, helped raise me, loyal, dependable, a good man caught in the service of something much less worthy than himself. As we neared the grand hall, a wave of sound crashed over me. Nobles chattering, silverware clinking, minstrels tuning up with discordant whines. The smell. Gods, the smell. So many heartbeats in one room. So much hot, coursing life. My fingers curled. Every cell in my body shrieked with the need to be amongst it, to drown myself in that crimson nectar. Geoffrey glanced at me, his face showing concern. I met his gaze squarely, trying to convey the control I didn't have. He squeezed my shoulder. "Courage, my friend. Tonight is a night for duty, not desire. Not desire. No, something darker, more ravenous. Something with fangs bared and eyes the color of dying embers." We reached the great doors. 2 guards in their gleaming mail snapped to attention. Geoffrey looked to me for a signal, his hand on his sword hilt. I took a deep breath through my nose, tasting copper and sweat in the air. "Open the doors," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. They swung open with a groan. A wave of noise crashed over me, nearly shoving me to my knees. Then everyone went silent. Eyes, hundreds of them, locked upon me like barbs. The change in the room was tangible, the air thickening with confusion and, yes, a delicious thread of fear. With Geoffrey at my side, I strode into the grand hall, down the long aisle, through the sea of parted nobles. Every eye followed me, searching, whispering behind hands. I was a spectacle, after all. The sickly young prince, pale as candle wax and too thin, a puppet ruler ready for the council's strings. My father's death had been sudden, a wasting illness the court physicians couldn't name. Now they gawked at his heir, who seemed to emanate that same wasting rot from his very pores. I reached the dais. The throne, meant to be mine tonight, stood empty. It was an insult, an accusation. I should have been crowned by now. My jaw clenched. "Where is the high priest?" My voice cracked even to my own ears. Geoffrey coughed delicately. "Majesty, there have been complications." I arched a brow. "Meaning?" He gestured vaguely to the cluster of priests in their ivory robes, their faces taut and whispers rising like steam. Their leader, the withered old crone they called Oracle, stood at the forefront, clutching her holy symbol like a weapon. I descended the steps, Geoffrey trailing hesitantly. "What is the meaning of this, Oracle?" She glared, weathered skin pulled over her bones like old parchment. "The gods see ill omens in your ascension, boy king." A ripple of muttering spread through the crowd. Of course, the rumors were out, but accusation from her, that was dangerous. It carried weight. "Be specific, Oracle," I challenged. "Or speak not at all." "The portents are clear. Your blood carries a taint. Shadows dance where they should not. You will lead us to ruin." "My blood?" I asked, forcing a laugh. "The gods object to the blood of our noble line that has ruled this land for centuries?" "Perhaps." The oracle's gaze was accusatory. "There's something not so noble about it anymore." The hall thrummed with tension. Geoffrey bristled beside me, but I silenced him with a look. The time for defending myself was past. Now, I needed to seize control. "Oracle," I said, my voice like iron, "the crown will be placed on my head tonight. If the gods have objections, let them strike me down themselves." Silence stretched. The old priestess glared, then spat on the carpet. It was surrender, of a sort. I turned and climbed the dais. At the foot of the throne, I stopped. An ancient ritual dictated the archbishop would place the crown on my head. He stood nearby, hands shaking. I plucked the crown from its velvet cushion myself. It was heavier than I imagined. I raised it, a golden halo above my head, and lowered it into place. The chill of the metal shocked me, but the hall burst into applause and relieved cheers. I was king, regardless of what curses might linger in my veins. As the applause dwindled, a sense of wrongness settled over me. It wasn't just the hunger burning in my gut that was always there now. No, this was the air itself. The way the shadows of the torch flames seemed to shrink closer to the walls as if recoiling from me. And in the great stained glass windows, my reflection, thinner. The gauntness of my face accentuated, eyes smouldering like banked coals. "My apologies, Your Majesty." The Archbishop stammered, his voice a thin squeak. A sudden indisposition. I shot him a tight smile that surely made him tremble more. It amused me a little to see power shift like grains of sand underfoot. "You are forgiven," I said magnanimously, "but let us postpone the rest of the ceremony. The coronation feast can wait." Truth was, the mix of hunger and adrenaline in my stomach made the thought of food repulsive. But the nobles didn't need to know that. It wouldn't do for their newly crowned king to vomit on his own scepter. As the crowd dispersed, muttering and casting sideways glances, Geoffrey fell into step beside me. "Majesty, are you certain this is wise? This abruptness could breed ill rumors." "And what rumors couldn't they breed about me already?" I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. He opened his mouth to protest, then simply bowed his head. "Of course, sire." The walk back to my chamber was a haze. Every torch seemed too bright, the clamour of voices too loud, every touch of fabric against my skin like a swarm of insects. It took every scrap of my will to merely keep moving. Once those damn doors closed behind us, it all threatened to break loose. The stone of the walls seemed to twist, as if the castle itself were a living, choking thing. Geoffrey made some concerned, clucking sound. I blinked hard and shook my head. "Majesty?" He placed a hand on my arm, steadying me as my knees wobbled. The scent of his blood, hot beneath the skin, was almost unbearable. I bared my teeth in a sound that was either a laugh or a snarl. "How amusing, wouldn't you say? The king, too weak to stand in his own halls." "We must find a solution, sire. A healer, a priest." "No," I cut him off. He flinched, and guilt stabbed at me, fleeting and faint as a ghost. "This is mine to bear and mine to fix." He looked like he wanted to argue, but wisdom won out. Geoffrey was a pragmatist. "Very well, Majesty, but perhaps some rest." The suggestion was almost my undoing. I swayed, the room tilting precariously. "Rest," I snarled, the word leaving my mouth with a venomous hiss. "You think mere sleep will quench this fire?" I knew what I needed. It throbbed in my veins, screamed in every beat of my traitorous heart. And tonight, a king would have what he required. Geoffrey watched me with wide, fearful eyes. Good. Let him fear. Let them all. It would keep them in line, for now. "Tonight," I said, "I dine elsewhere." Night painted the city in shades of smoke and shadow. I moved through it like a wraith, Geoffrey a silent spectre at my heel. The coronation finery had been replaced with simpler garb, dark clothes that helped me vanish into the inky alleyways. My goal? One of the less salubrious establishments in the lower city. Somewhere blood spilled freely and screams blended into the din of urban desperation. As we reached the shadowed doorway with its crudely painted sign, Geoffrey gripped my arm. "Sire, perhaps this is imprudent. Surely there are other ways." I shoved him back, the contact with his skin sending a jolt of terrible yearning through me. "Other ways!" I hissed, canines lengthening in a grin. "A soothing poultice. Perhaps a monk's chanted prayers. Don't be a fool, Geoffrey." The fear in his eyes mingled with pity. "If this becomes known." "It won't," I snarled. "Now, are you my advisor or my warden? One offers counsel, the other impedes." He bowed his head, old shoulders sagging with defeat. We entered. The stench hit me. Sweat, stale ale, and something sharper underneath, like butchered meat gone rotten. Raucous laughter cut off abruptly as the crowd noticed the new arrivals. A cloaked figure in the shadows, followed by an old man in the livery of a court advisor. The whispers must have been incendiary, but the sight of me stilled them. Even beneath the gloom, the ravages of my condition were clear. The gauntness, the sickly pallor, the eyes that smouldered with far too much unnatural light. A heavily scarred man with a shaved head and arms like tree trunks pushed his way through the throng. The tavern keeper I assumed by his greasy apron and the way his meaty hand hovered over the axe at his belt. "Lord Geoffrey," he said with a wary bow, and... His gaze slid to me, uncertain. "Our business here is of no concern to you," I said. "Keep those," I jerked a thumb at the silent crowd, "out of my way and we'll have no trouble." The man licked his lips, eyes darting between me and the gold coins I tossed on the bar. Greed, thankfully, was a predictable motivator. "Second floor, back corner. Best room in the house," he barked, then clapped his hands at the patrons. "Show's over, folks. Drinks on the house, till the ale runs dry." Cheers erupted, masking the grumbled curses. The scent of free alcohol was a far sweeter lure than any rumour of a sickly king. In moments, the common room was a raucous sea, thankfully turned away from us. Geoffrey climbed the creaking wooden stairs after me, muttering under his breath. Probably prayers, the pathetic old hypocrite. I ignored him. The second floor was a narrow corridor dotted with closed doors. From behind some came muffled laughter, others held whispered conversations. Still others, well, rhythmic squeaks and breathless moans were not difficult to interpret. We reached the last door. I rapped on the rotting wood, hard. "Go away!" a woman's voice shrieked from within. Harsh and cracked with overuse, but the youthful pitch unmistakable. Perfect. The door cracked open, a single coal-rimmed eye peering out. Shock widened it, followed by calculation. "Business as usual, my dear," I murmured, a smile curling my lips. "With a most particular appetite tonight." The girl gasped, her single visible eye widening further. She glanced past me to Geoffrey, as if seeking some normalcy in the sight of him. But Geoffrey only stared ahead, face pale and set, his loyalty waging a silent war with his disgust. "Can't afford to be picky tonight, eh?" she hissed, her bravado cracking the moment she met my gaze. I gave my cruelest smile, baring teeth now far sharper than they had any right to be. "Indeed. Now shall we?" I didn't bother waiting for an answer, pushing past her into the squalid room. The space spoke of desperation. A stained mattress on the splintery floor, a chipped basin and pitcher, and a single curtained window admitting moonlight. The air hummed with the sharp stench of sweat and cheap perfume. The girl, barely more than a child, shut the door slowly. Suddenly she threw herself at my feet, the movement jarringly graceless. "Please! I know you highborn types get bored, like playing with your food before the feast. So torture me, if you must. But not that. Not that way." She choked on the words, tears welling up in her eyes. Pity stirred, a weak, unwelcome thing. Yet a part of me, a diminishing part but still present, recognized the truth of her words. I was more monster than monarch now. In that moment, staring down at this whimpering scrap of humanity, a wave of revulsion crashed over me. My own reflection in the cracked mirror by the bed seemed to distort, warping into something inhuman. Geoffrey cleared his throat. "Sire, perhaps. There are limits to even a king's necessities." I turned on him, the hunger in my gut twisting into rage. "And who decides those limits, Geoffrey? The gods, tradition, you?" I slammed a fist into the flimsy wall, sending plaster crumbling. "I am the limit now." The girl cowered in the corner, whimpering. Her fear fueled the beast within me further. No, I couldn't stop this. Wouldn't. To halt now would be weakness, and weakness in this damned form was a death sentence. "Come!" I growled at the girl, my voice barely recognizable even to my own ears. "You misunderstand. It is not torture I intend, but sustenance." She scrambled back, sobs caught in her throat. Yet when I advanced, she didn't fight. Some animal instinct, perhaps, told her it was pointless. My hands were on her scrawny neck in an instant, her pulse fluttering beneath my touch like a trapped bird. Her eyes rolled back, exposing the whites. The hunger grumbled, a beast tearing at its cage. I bared my fangs and paused. Every instinct shrieked to sink my teeth in, to drink deep of that sweet, hot life. But the reflection in that mirror mocked me. It was no longer a king who gazed back, but a predator devoid of all humanity. I flung the girl away. She crashed into the wall with a pathetic cry. "Get out!" I snarled. "Run, and don't look back!" She didn't need to be told twice, scrambling to her feet and dashing out the door, her sobs fading down the corridor. I sagged against the wall, tremors racking my body. This wasn't mere thirst, it was an insatiable yearning, hollowing me out, leaving nothing but a ravenous void where my soul had been. Geoffrey crouched beside me, a comforting presence that only exacerbated my self-loathing. "Sire," he began, then fell silent. What could he say? The truth hung between us like a headsman's axe. "This was a mistake," I finally gritted out, every word laced with bitterness. "To think control was possible." "We shall find a way, Majesty." His voice held a stubborn hope that I no longer shared. A harsh laugh escaped me. A way? Back from this? From becoming the blood-soaked phantom the Oracle warned of? I clambered to my feet, forcing my trembling body into the semblance of strength. "Get me back to the castle. There are matters I must attend to. Pretenses to maintain." The journey back was agonizing. Every rustle of leaves in the night breeze sounded like the flapping of monstrous wings, and shadows morphed into horrors lurking at the edge of my vision. The once familiar castle loomed ahead, not as my sanctuary, but a tomb. Within my chambers, Geoffrey bustled about, lighting tapers and drawing the curtains with practiced efficiency. Each tiny point of light seemed a painful accusation in the suffocating gloom. "Enough!" I snarled, collapsing into a heavy armchair. "Each candle is a judgment against me." "Majesty, be silent!" The word burst from me with such force that even the ever-loyal Geoffrey flinched. I took a shaky breath, forcing some semblance of composure. "Leave me, Geoffrey. I need to think." Not that clarity of thought was possible in this state, yet solitude held its own bleak appeal. Geoffrey bowed, troubled eyes searching mine before he retreated as quietly as he came. Silence settled like a suffocating cloak. My gaze settled on the great iron-bound chest against the far wall. Within it was my father's suit of armor, polished steel and silver inlay, a symbol of strength I could no longer embody. It wasn't just his throne I'd inherited, but his legacy, his kingdom, a realm now ruled by a shadow of its former king. How long could my affliction be hidden? Would the court whisper of a wasting sickness, some nameless plague? They wouldn't accept the truth. And perhaps they were right. A kingdom ruled by a fiend, a predator in a crown, wasn't a kingdom at all. It was a gilded cage awaiting its collapse. But the alternative? To resist this hunger until it consumed me whole. The mere thought left me shuddering, my traitorous body amplifying its own terrible need. Perhaps the oracle was correct. I was damned, a walking abomination, and my reign doomed to be short and drenched in blood. As the dawn painted the sky, the weight of an impossible decision settled upon me. To cling to my fraying humanity, or surrender to the beast waiting beneath the surface. King or monster, the choice would define not just my fate, but that of the entire realm. Days morphed into a waking nightmare. Each sunrise brought a torment deeper than the last. I sought solace in the bottle, but the vintage wine I guzzled did nothing to extinguish the burning within. It merely dulled my senses. The few times I ventured beyond the castle walls, it was always under the guise of pressing affairs. Yet, those journeys grew shorter, more erratic. I flinched from every gaze, imagining whispers behind each bowed head, the court scenting the rot at the heart of their king. Geoffrey did his best. He brought in healers, discreetly, grizzled old men who smelled of strange herbs and muttered archaic incantations. None of it worked. Their potions tasted like bile and offered only temporary respite, like throwing a cup of water on a wildfire. In the end, Geoffrey stood before me, his shoulders stooped in defeat. "Majesty, there is another option." The words hung in the silent chamber like a dropped noose. We both knew what he meant, though neither dared utter it aloud. "The dungeons," I choked out, the words barely audible. "They hold prisoners." His silence was an affirmation. Lowlives, those deemed irredeemable by the crown, languishing in the darkness beneath my very feet. "It would be discreet," he pressed quietly. "No one would suspect. Gods know what those criminals deserve." He even managed a weak smile, but it was the gesture of a drowning man grasping at driftwood. The prospect brought a bitter, almost hysterical laugh to my lips. King turned prisoner feeder. Could I stoop so low? Yet the alternative. Every cell in my body, every twisted nerve howled its agreement. Tonight, survival would be my only crown. "Prepare a hooded cloak," I said at last, my voice devoid of any pretense of majesty. "Tell no one must know." The look on Geoffrey's face was a twisted mixture of relief and pity. He bowed, a silent servant obeying a master. That night, I descended into the depths of my own domain. The dungeons were a warren of stone and despair, the stench of unwashed bodies and decay clinging to the frigid air. Torchlight turned the bars of the cells into fiery cages, trapping shadows that writhed and moaned within. Geoffrey led me to a far corner, where the prisoners were the worst of the lot. Murderers, oath-breakers, those whose crimes were too heinous to speak of in polite company. He stopped before a cell where a hulking, unshaven figure huddled against the wall. The prisoner lifted his head, eyes gleaming with a feral cunning in the dimness. "What's this?" he croaked. "The king himself, come to see how the lowborn live." "Your tongue wags too freely, cur!" snapped Geoffrey, stepping forward, but I held up a hand to stop him. The prisoner only grinned, revealing rotted teeth. "Not so high and mighty now, are we?" He was right. In this place, beneath the weight of necessity, the crown meant nothing. Here, I was just another starving beast. "Bring him out," I commanded. Geoffrey hesitated, but the desperate gleam in my eyes left him no room for argument. Grumbling, he retrieved keys and unlocked the rusted cell door. The prisoner scrambled out with surprising agility, hope dawning in his eyes. Foolish, fleeting hope. "The dungeons won't hold you long," I said softly. "Your punishment ends tonight. Come." And so, cloaked in shadows, I led a condemned man not to freedom but into a different kind of darkness. A darkness within myself where a hunger waited to be fed. Geoffrey led us through a maze of twisting corridors deeper into the castle's underbelly. This was a part of my domain I'd never had reason to visit. A secret realm of hidden tunnels and forgotten chambers only servants and rats knew well. Finally, we reached a moss-covered stone door held fast with a tarnished chain and rusted lock. "There's an unused wine cellar behind this. It's private," Geoffrey said, his voice strained. He avoided my gaze as he fumbled with the lock. The door swung open with a groan, revealing a steep, damp staircase descending into blackness. The prisoner hesitated, doubt crossing his filthy features. "My mercy has limits," I growled. Every wasted minute made the burning torment inside me worse. "Go down or I'll make you." A flash of defiance sparked in his eyes, then died as quickly as it came. Whatever hope had fueled him now guttered out, the reality of his situation sinking in. Shoulders slumping, he descended the steps. With a final furtive look at me, Geoffrey followed him into the darkness, the door clanging shut behind them. I was alone. For moments, thick silence pressed against me, broken only by the insistent drip of water on stone. Every fibre of my being urged me downwards, the scent of the prisoner fading with agonizing slowness. The conflict within me was a brutal thing. Shame, disgust, and something older, wilder, and infinitely more terrible. Finally, unable to endure it a second longer, I plunged after them. I found the chamber easily, its only dim illumination a single sputtering candle on a dusty barrel. Geoffrey stood, hands trembling, holding the candle high while the prisoner cowered on the floor. "My lord," Geoffrey began, but I silenced him with a gesture. The prisoner looked up, animal fear naked in his eyes. It mirrored my own, I realized with a jolt, for in the candlelight I saw the monster, the hollowed cheeks, the burning eyes of a predator poised to strike. This was what I had become. I moved into the chamber, the prisoner shuffling back until his spine hit the damp wall. He stared up at me, defiance bleeding away, leaving only a primal pleading terror. The same terror my victims in the tavern must have felt, a fact that made my stomach churn with revulsion. Yet the hunger was relentless, demanding its due. "No," I said, clenching my fists so hard my nails bit into my palms. "I will not." But then he whimpered, and the sound was my undoing. Weakness, given voice, a plea for mercy I would not receive myself. In that moment, the fragile threads of control snapped. I was upon him, not as a king, but as the starving beast I had become. His screams pierced the silence of the small cellar, the bare stone amplifying their chilling clarity. Then silence. And after, there was only the stillness. I looked down at the ruined form before me, crimson staining my hands, and slumped to my knees. Geoffrey, drawn by the silence, descended the stairs, his face a mask of horror and resigned pity. One look, and he knew. With trembling hands he set the candle down and removed his tattered cloak, draping it over the remains. He bowed his head as if in prayer for the departed. But that soul was beyond prayers now, and perhaps so was mine. In the days that followed, I became a ghost haunting my own castle. Each morning, I would find myself in the cellar, the stench of death and my own shame staining the air like a poison. I'd stare at the damp stones, at the smear of red that no amount of scrubbing could erase. Geoffrey said nothing, yet his silence was heavy with sorrow. He left food and water on a stool outside my chambers, knowing I'd have no servants witness my nocturnal feasts. His gaze, those few times our paths crossed, held a strange mixture of pity, disgust, and lingering loyalty. Perhaps he hoped that some shred of the king he'd served still lurked beneath the predator's skin. Perhaps he just waited for the inevitable, for me to cross a line from which no return was possible. The charade of leadership continued. I'd sit upon the throne, my gaunt face a macabre mask, meting out judgments in a hollow voice devoid of authority. The court whispered, of course, but fear kept them at bay for now. I was a ravenous wolf, and they dared not approach too closely, lest I turn my hunger outwards once more. Word must have leaked of the prisoner's disappearance too. In the grimy taverns and shadowy squares of the city, my legend grew. The Blood King, they called me now, a cautionary tale mothers hissed to unruly children. I both revelled in and recoiled from the whispered title. One moonless night, a new craving crept over me. Something twisted and sharp, born of both desperation and a terrible curiosity. It wasn't merely blood I hungered for now, but power. If I fed upon the truly corrupt, those with darkness in their own hearts, would it taint me less, or perhaps taint me more fully, until the transformation was complete? Geoffrey, his stooped form a silhouette in the doorway, read the intent in my eyes. "Sire, please," he began, voice hoarse. "Have them prepared," I snarled, cutting him off. "The worst of them. Those the city whispers of but dares not name aloud out of fear." His hesitation was but a heartbeat. Then, like the loyal dog he was, he bowed and turned away. Within days, shadowy figures were dragged from their opulent manors. Corrupt tax collectors, lords whispered to consort with dark powers, merchants grown fat on exploitation. Their screams beneath the castle pierced my ears, their tainted blood a heady, nauseating wine. Yet even that depraved feast left an emptiness within. I saw the fear growing bolder in the eyes of the courtiers, their whispers barely contained behind manicured smiles. One morning, as the first rays of dawn painted streaks of pale light on my chamber floor, a clarity as sharp and merciless as a headsman's axe cut through my self-induced haze. There was no going back. Each act of dark necessity dragged me further into darkness. My reflection was no longer recognizable, eyes sunken and blazing, skin clinging tautly to my skull like a poorly fitted mask. I was the beast the oracle foretold, a king in name alone. That day, as the courtiers and advisors filed into the throne room, their bowed heads and nervous glances a mockery of true respect, I did not sit upon the golden seat. And as the sun dipped, I slipped unseen from the castle. The Blood King, the whispered legend of shadowed alleys, would leave his decaying husk of a kingdom behind. From tonight, I'd haunt the vast, untamed wilds beyond. Cities held too many temptations, too many eyes. Perhaps among forgotten ruins or beneath the starlit canopy of ancient forests, I might find a different sort of solace. Or perhaps I would simply run until I collapsed, the beast finally consuming its wretched host. But no matter my destination, the choice was made. The crown would lie where it fell, waiting for dust and time to claim it, the legacy of a reign bathed in blood and shadow.